I just did what any accountant would do. No, he shook his head. Any accountant would have charged me $50,000 for this analysis. He did it because it was the right thing to do. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. She stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they'd been standing, how intimate their conversation had become. I should go, she said. My supervisor makes rounds at midnight. Alicia. The way he said her name made her stop at the door. Thank you. She nodded and slipped out into the hallway, heart racing like she'd just run a marathon. What would you do if your boss discovered your hidden talents? Would you be brave enough to speak up? Because what she didn't know was that her honesty had just started something that would change both their lives forever. She agreed to one late-night meeting to save his company. She never expected him to want to save her dreams. The next night, Alicia approached Richard's office with trembling hands. He'd left a note in her cleaning cart. Please stay after your shift. We need to talk. RD. 12 hours had passed since their conversation, and she'd spent every minute wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Speaking up went against every survival instinct she developed. Invisible people didn't get fired. Invisible people kept their jobs, paid their rent, and stayed safe. But visible people, people who dared to know more than they should, they got replaced. The boardroom had been transformed after hours. No longer a stage for corporate theater, it became an intimate space where harsh lights dimmed to amber and voices dropped to conspiratorial whispers. Richard sat at the head of the long table. The controversial contract spread before him like evidence in a trial. He looked up when she entered, and his smile was warm enough to melt her anxiety. Thank you for coming, he said, gesturing to the chair beside him. Please sit. The leather chair probably cost more than she made in 3 months, but she settled into it like she belonged there. The feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. I spent the day with our legal team, he began, going through every clause you identified. You were right about all of it. Relief flooded through her. So you're not signing? Hell no. He laughed, and the sound transformed his entire face. You literally saved us from the most expensive mistake in company history. The question is, what do I do now? For the next hour, they worked together like partners. Richard shared the full scope of the deal: partnership agreements, technology transfers, market expansion plans. Alicia analyzed each component with surgical precision, finding flaws and opportunities that had escaped teams of experts. Working closely over documents, their hands brushed constantly. When he leaned over to point out contract sections, his shoulder pressed against hers. When she reached for her pen, her fingers grazed his wrist. Each accidental touch sent heat racing through her bloodstream. The electricity of shared intellectual passion was almost overwhelming. Your analysis is incredible, he murmured, studying her notes. Where did you learn to break down complex deals like this? Professor Williams at Howard, she said without thinking. He used to say that every contract tells 2 stories: what the lawyers want you to see and what they're trying to hide. Smart man. Smart woman. Actually, Dr. Sarah Williams. She ran the financial crimes unit for the FBI before she started teaching. Richard's eyebrows shot up. And she taught you? She tried to. Alicia's voice grew soft with old regret. I was her best student, she used to say. Had a full scholarship lined up for my senior year, and she'd already connected me with internships at major firms. What happened? The question she'd been dreading. The answer that explained everything and nothing. My grandmother raised me after my parents died. She was everything: mother, father, best friend, biggest supporter. When the doctors diagnosed her with stage 4 cancer, I had a choice: stay in D.C. and finish school, or come home and make sure she wasn't alone. That couldn't have been easy. Easiest decision I ever made. The words came out fiercer than she intended. Some things matter more than degrees. Richard studied her face in the dim light. You gave up your entire future. I chose my family. And now she's gone, and I clean offices. She tried to make it sound matter of fact, but pain leaked through anyway. Why are you cleaning offices instead of running them? The question hung between them, loaded with implications. She met his eyes directly, refusing to look away from the intensity she found there. Because running them requires connections I don't have, opportunities that aren't offered to girls from Jackson, Mississippi, and second chances that don't exist for people like me. What if they did exist? Something in his tone made her pulse skip. What do you mean? What if someone offered you those second chances? What if someone saw your potential and wanted to help you use it? The conversation was moving into dangerous territory. She could feel herself standing at the edge of something that would change everything. A cliff she could jump from or step away from, but either choice would define the rest of her life. Why would you do that? She whispered. Because wasting talent like yours should be a crime. He leaned closer, and she caught that intoxicating scent of his cologne. Because you saved my company, and I barely know your last name. Because no woman should have to hide her brilliance just to survive. The words hit her like physical blows. No one had seen her potential in so long. She'd forgotten it existed. What exactly are you offering? A job. A real job. Financial analyst position with competitive salary, full benefits, and the chance to use that incredible brain of yours for something more than identifying cleaning supplies. It was everything she'd dreamed about during those long nights, pushing a mop cart through empty offices. The chance to be herself again, to use her education, to matter. But dreams like this came with hidden costs she'd learned not to trust. Mr. Dalton. Richard, he corrected softly. Richard, this is incredibly generous, but I have to ask, what do you want in return? His answer came without hesitation. I want you to be everything you were meant to be. When someone sees potential in you that you've forgotten existed, how do you respond? Has anyone ever changed your life with a single opportunity? Because what happened next would test everything she thought she knew about taking risks. He offered her everything she'd ever wanted, a real job, respect, a chance to use her brilliant mind. But nothing prepared her for what she wanted in return. 3 days later, Alicia stood outside the executive floor wearing a business suit that still had department store tags. Richard had insisted on advancing her first month's salary for professional attire, and the shopping trip had been more overwhelming than her first day of college. The navy blazer fit perfectly. The pencil skirt made her legs look longer. Low heels that didn't hurt her feet. For the first time in years, she looked in the mirror and saw the woman she used to be. Confident, capable, ready to conquer the world. But wearing the costume didn't erase her fear of the performance. Richard's corner office at dawn was a cathedral of ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Chicago awakening below. Street lights fading as sunrise painted the sky gold and pink. Inside, two people from different worlds were about to discover they shared the same hunger for something more. He looked up from his computer when she knocked, and his expression made her breath catch. Not surprise or approval, but something deeper. Recognition, like he was seeing her the way she was meant to be seen. "Good morning, Ms. Brown," he said, standing to greet her. "You look—" He paused, searching for the right word. Professional. But his eyes said something else entirely. They said beautiful. They said perfect. They said things that made her skin warm and her pulse race. "Thank you, Mr. Dalton." "Richard," he corrected again, moving around the desk toward her. "We're colleagues now." The word felt strange and wonderful on her tongue. Colleagues. Partners. Equals. "I have something for you," he said, reaching past her to close the office door. The movement brought him close enough that she caught his morning cologne, fresher than his evening scent, but just as intoxicating. His hand brushed her shoulder as he stepped back, and the casual touch sent electricity shooting down her spine. He handed her a business card, heavy paper stock, embossed lettering. Alicia Brown, Senior Financial Analyst, Dalton Enterprises. Her name, her new title, her future printed in elegant script. "Senior Analyst?" she managed. "But I thought that you'd start at the bottom." Richard shook his head. "Your analysis of that contract was graduate-level work. Why would I waste your talents on entry-level tasks?" The business card trembled in her fingers. Senior Analyst. The position she'd dreamed about during her Howard days. The career she thought was lost forever when she traded textbooks for a mop bucket. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take the job." "Of course I'll take it. But Richard, I have to ask, why are you doing this?" "Really?" He walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the city he'd conquered through ambition and intelligence. When he spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she hadn't heard before. "My father was a mechanic," he said quietly. "Brilliant man. Could diagnose engine problems that stumped factory-trained technicians. But he never got the credit because he didn't have the right education, the right connections, the right accent." Alicia waited, sensing this story mattered more than business cards or job titles. "He used to tell me that the world was full of hidden talent. People who were just as smart as the executives making decisions, but they never got the chance to prove it." Richard turned back to face her. "When you explained that contract to me, I heard my father's voice. I saw his intelligence in your eyes." The honesty in his words took her breath away. This wasn't charity. It wasn't pity. It was recognition of something rare and valuable that others had overlooked. "Your father sounds like a wise man." He was, and he would have loved meeting you. The moment stretched between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to name. Then Richard's phone rang, shattering the intimacy like dropped glass. He glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted. Professional mask sliding back into place. "I should take this," he said apologetically. "But Alicia, welcome to the team." She nodded and turned toward the door, but his voice stopped her. "Oh, and there's a staff meeting at 9. I'd like to introduce you to everyone." Her stomach dropped. "Introduce me how?" "As our new senior analyst. The woman who's going to help take this company to the next level." Before she could respond, his phone rang again. Same name flashing on the screen. This time, his jaw tightened with frustration. "Sorry," he muttered, answering the call. "Good morning, Victoria." Even from across the room, Alicia could hear the female voice on the other end, sharp, demanding, territorial. She caught fragments of the conversation. "Dinner party tonight. Important investors. Where have you been?" Reality crashed over her like cold water. Of course there was someone else. Men like Richard Dalton didn't stay single. They had fiancés. Beautiful, educated women from their own world who understood charity galas and country clubs and never had to choose between family and dreams. She was about to say yes when his phone rang again. Victoria's name flashing on the screen, reminding them both that some boundaries couldn't be crossed, no matter how much they wanted to. What would you do if someone offered you everything you'd ever wanted professionally, but you realized you wanted something more personally? Have you ever found yourself attracted to someone completely out of your league? Share your thoughts below, because workplace dynamics are about to get very complicated. Working together every day was torture, especially when she discovered that wanting someone you can't have only makes the desire burn brighter. 2 weeks into her new position, Alicia had mastered the art of professional composure. She could analyze quarterly reports while Richard's cologne filled the conference room. She could present financial projections without stuttering when he leaned close to study her charts. She could even maintain eye contact during their daily briefings, ignoring the way his attention made her skin burn. But she couldn't stop thinking about Victoria. The fiancé appeared in conversations like background music, dinner reservations Richard couldn't keep, social events that required his presence, wedding planning that consumed his weekends. Victoria Henderson, daughter of Chicago's former mayor, graduate of Northwestern's business school, perfect match for a man building an empire. Everything Alicia could never be. "The Morrison account needs immediate attention," Richard was saying, pulling her back to the present. They sat across from each other in his office. Quarterly reports spread between them like a buffer zone. Their contract expires next month, and they're considering other options. "I can handle the renewal," Alicia offered. Their concern seemed to center on cost analysis rather than service quality. "Actually, I was hoping you'd come with me to their offices tomorrow. Client meetings are part of your development as senior analyst." The thought of spending a day away from the office with Richard made her pulse quicken and her common sense scream warnings. "Is that necessary? I mean, I could prepare a presentation." "Alicia." The way he said her name always made her forget whatever objection she'd been forming. "You have exceptional analytical skills, but you need face-to-face experience with clients. Trust me on this." Trust. The word hung between them, loaded with implications that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the electricity that sparked every time they shared the same space. Of course, she agreed. What time should I meet you there? I'll pick you up at 8. We can review strategy during the drive. An hour alone in his car, trapped in a small space where his presence would overwhelm every professional boundary she'd tried to build, where conversation might drift into personal territory that felt increasingly dangerous. Actually, I can drive myself. Nonsense. It's on my way. Before she could argue further, his phone buzzed with a text. The smile that had been warming his features disappeared, replaced by the expression she'd learned meant Victoria demanded his attention. I should go, Alicia said, gathering her papers. You obviously need to. Stay. The command came out sharper than he'd intended. He softened his tone immediately. Please, this can wait. But he was already reaching for his phone, and Alicia caught a glimpse of the message. Don't forget tonight. My parents are expecting us at 7. The reminder hit her like a physical blow. While she was fantasizing about car rides and client meetings, he was planning dinners with future in-laws. While she was developing feelings that threatened everything she'd worked for, he was building a life with someone who belonged in it. Go, she said quietly. Your fiancé is waiting. Something flickered across his expression. Surprise, maybe, or discomfort at hearing Victoria's title spoken aloud. How did you? Office gossip travels fast. She forced a professional smile. Besides, it's none of my business. But it felt like her business. Every phone call, every text, every reminder that he belonged to someone else felt personal in ways that scared her. Richard stood and moved around the desk, stopping closer to her than strictly necessary. Close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, could count the faint lines that appeared when he concentrated. Alicia, I want you to know that working with you has been... He paused, searching for words that wouldn't cross the invisible line they'd both pretended didn't exist. It's been the best part of my day. Every day. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and dangerous and impossible to ignore. Richard, I know. He stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself. I know this is complicated. Complicated. Such a simple word for the chaos of wanting someone you couldn't have, of building something you couldn't keep, of pretending your heart hadn't been stolen by a man who wore another woman's ring. I should go home, she said, but her feet didn't move toward the door. You should. He didn't step away either. For a moment, they stood frozen in that space where honesty lived, where neither could pretend they didn't feel the pull between them, where the air itself seemed charged with possibility and prohibition. Then his phone rang again. Victoria's name lighting up the screen like a warning signal. Go, Alicia whispered, this time meaning it. She's waiting for you. She was halfway to the elevator when his voice called after her. 8 o'clock tomorrow. Don't change your mind about the client meeting. In the elevator, watching the floors count down to the parking garage, Alicia pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall and tried to remember why she'd wanted this job so badly. Oh, right, because she was good at it, because it gave her independence, because it had nothing to do with the way Richard looked at her, like she was the most fascinating woman in the world. Nothing at all. Have you ever found yourself attracted to someone you couldn't have? How did you handle the tension? Share your experience below, because tomorrow's client meeting is about to test every professional boundary they've tried to build. Comment below if you've ever been the other woman, even accidentally. And hit that subscribe button because this workplace romance is about to get very complicated. She walked into that ballroom like she belonged there, not knowing she was about to start a scandal that would change everything. The charity gala was Richard's idea. You need to meet our major clients, he'd explained that morning. Tonight's event will have half the city's financial leaders in one room. What he didn't mention was that Victoria would be there too, draped on his arm like expensive jewelry. Alicia almost backed out 3 times while getting dressed. The black cocktail dress she'd bought with her first real paycheck felt too tight, too revealing, too much like she was trying to be someone she wasn't. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw a woman who belonged in boardrooms and ballrooms. Not because of where she came from, but because of who she'd become. The grand ballroom sparkled like a jewelry box. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow light across marble floors where Chicago's elite danced to string quartets and million-dollar promises. Women wore gowns that cost more than cars. Men discussed deals that could fund small countries. And Richard stood near the entrance in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking like he'd been born for this world of privilege and power. Victoria Henderson was everything Alicia had imagined and worse. Blonde hair, swept into an elegant updo that probably required a team of stylists. A red dress that hugged curves money had perfected through personal trainers and spa treatments. Diamond earrings that caught the light every time she turned her head to survey her kingdom. She was beautiful in a way that made other women feel invisible. But when Richard spotted Alicia across the crowded room, Victoria might as well have disappeared. His eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her forget how to breathe. She watched his gaze travel from her face down the length of her dress and back up, approval and something darker burning in his expression. Victoria noticed his distraction immediately. Her perfectly manicured fingers tightened on his arm as she followed his stare. When she saw Alicia, her smile turned razor-sharp. "Darling," Victoria's voice carried the kind of sweetness that could cut glass. "Who's your little friend?" Little friend. The words were designed to shrink Alicia back into invisibility, but something had changed over the past month. She wasn't the scared cleaning lady anymore. She was a senior analyst who'd saved a billion-dollar company, and she belonged in this room just as much as anyone else. "Victoria, I'd like you to meet Alicia Brown," Richard said, his voice carefully neutral. "She's our new senior financial analyst." "How lovely," Victoria purred, extending a hand like she was doing Alicia a favor by acknowledging her existence. "And what did you do before joining Richard's little company?" The question was a trap wrapped in silk. Victoria had probably researched every new employee, looking for threats to her territory. She knew exactly what Alicia used to do. "I worked in facilities management," Alicia replied smoothly. "No scam, no apology. Just facts." "Oh." Victoria's smile widened with false sympathy. "Well, isn't that a wonderful success story? From janitor to analyst. Like something out of a movie." The insult landed exactly as intended, but instead of shrinking away, Alicia felt something fierce wake up inside her chest. "It is like a movie," she agreed calmly. "The kind where talent gets recognized regardless of where it starts." Richard's lips twitched with what might have been pride or amusement. Victoria's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Well, I hope you enjoy the party," Victoria said dismissively. "Richard, didn't you promise to introduce me to the Morgans?" But Richard wasn't looking at Victoria anymore. He was staring at Alicia like she was the most fascinating woman in the room. "Actually," he said, "I promised Alicia the first dance." Victoria's face went white beneath her professional makeup. "Excuse me?" "Business networking," Richard explained, but his eyes never left Alicia's face. "She needs to meet potential clients, and the dance floor is where real relationships get built." It was a reasonable explanation that fooled absolutely no one. When he pulled her close for the waltz, his hands splayed across her bare back, fingertips tracing the elegant line of her spine. The touch sent fire racing through her bloodstream. "You're playing with fire," she whispered against his ear as they moved across the marble floor. "Then let's burn," he replied, spinning her until her dress flared like liquid midnight. The music wrapped around them like a cocoon, blocking out the watching crowd, the whispered gossip, the danger of what they were doing. For 3 perfect minutes, there was only the rhythm of the orchestra and the heat of his hands guiding her through steps she'd never learned but somehow knew. Other couples danced around them, but Alicia felt like they were alone in the universe. Every turn brought her closer to his chest. Every dip made her heart race faster. When the song ended and he didn't immediately step away, she realized they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. The camera flash came from nowhere, bright and sudden as lightning. A society photographer capturing the evening's glamour. But the image he'd just taken would destroy everything. Richard's lips near her ear. Her hand pressed against his chest. Both of them looking like lovers who'd forgotten the world was watching. Victoria stood at the edge of the dance floor, her face twisted with rage and humiliation. Around her, Chicago's social elite whispered behind champagne glasses and knowing smiles. "We should," Alicia started. "No," Richard said firmly, his arms still around her waist. "We should dance." What's more dangerous, denying what you feel or giving into it? Share your thoughts below, because that photograph is about to change everything. The headline read, "CEO's Mystery Woman." But the real mystery was how long they could deny what everyone could see. Alicia's phone started ringing at 6 a.m. Unknown numbers, blocked calls, journalists who'd somehow gotten her personal information overnight. She let them all go to voicemail, but she couldn't avoid the newspapers that had been shoved under her apartment door. Dalton's Dancing Queen screamed the Chicago Tribune's gossip section. From Op-to Millionaire questioned the Sun-Times business page. But it was the society blog that made her stomach drop. Sources close to the couple confirmed that Victoria Henderson's engagement to billionaire CEO Richard Dalton is on shaky ground, following his public display of affection with mysterious newcomer Alicia Brown. The photograph dominated every story. That perfect, damning moment when they'd forgotten to pretend they were just colleagues. Her dress, his hands, their faces inches apart. It looked exactly like what it was. Two people falling in love who had no business falling in love. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Don't come to the office today. Let me handle this." Handle this. Like she was a problem to be managed instead of a person whose life was being torn apart by tabloid speculation. She was still staring at the message when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a reporter with a camera crew pressing the buzzer with the persistence of someone paid by the story. Alicia grabbed her keys and headed for the back exit of her building. She had to get to work, had to face whatever consequences were waiting, had to prove that she was more than just a scandal in a pretty dress. The Dalton Enterprises lobby buzzed with unusual energy. Employees clustered around newspapers and phones, their voices dropping to whispers when they saw her step off the elevator. Some looked curious. Others looked judgmental. A few seemed genuinely concerned. But it was the security guard's sympathetic smile that almost broke her composure. "Don't let them get to you, Ms. Brown," he said quietly. "Anyone with eyes could see you earned your place here." Richard's office was empty, but she could hear raised voices from the conference room. Through the glass walls, she saw him facing down what looked like an emergency board meeting. His posture was rigid, defensive. Whatever they were saying, it wasn't good. She was heading to her own office when Victoria appeared like a perfectly dressed hurricane. Well, Victoria said, her voice dripping false sweetness. "If it isn't Chicago's newest celebrity." Up close, Victoria's perfection showed cracks. Her makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes. Her smile looked painful to maintain. "Victoria, I'm sorry about." "Sorry?" Victoria laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "Nothing happened between us." "Nothing?" Victoria held up her phone, displaying the photograph that had already gone viral on social media. "This looks like nothing to you." Alicia stared at the image, seeing it from Victoria's perspective. Her boyfriend's hands on another woman. His attention completely focused on someone else. The unmistakable chemistry that radiated from every pixel. "You're right," Alicia said quietly. "That's not nothing. But it's not what you think either." "What I think," Victoria stepped closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "is that you're an opportunistic little nobody who saw a rich man and decided to upgrade her situation." The words hit like physical blows, each one designed to reduce Alicia back to what she used to be, invisible, powerless, ashamed. "That's not true, isn't it?" Victoria's smile turned predatory. "Poor girl from Mississippi works her way up from janitor to executive in record time. Coincidentally happens to be beautiful. Coincidentally catches the boss's attention. What would you call it?" "I'd call it earning my position through talent and hard work." "Oh, please." Victoria's laugh was cold as winter wind. "You think anyone believes you got promoted because of your accounting skills? Richard has a weakness for charity cases. Ask his ex-wife." The comment was designed to wound, but it revealed something Victoria probably hadn't meant to share. Richard had been married before. To someone Victoria considered charity case. I'm not anyone's charity case, Alicia said firmly. No? Then prove it. Resign. Walk away from this mess you've created. Save what's left of Richard's reputation and let him marry someone who actually belongs in his world. The challenge hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Victoria was betting that Alicia would retreat, would choose invisibility over the brutal spotlight of public scrutiny. She was betting wrong. I'm not going anywhere, Alicia said. My work here speaks for itself. Your work. Victoria's voice turned mocking. You mean that contract analysis that any first-year law student could have done? Richard made you feel special, didn't he? Made you think you were irreplaceable. Before Alicia could respond, the conference room door opened and Richard emerged, his face thunderous with anger. He spotted them immediately, and his expression shifted from frustrated to protective in seconds. Victoria, what are you doing here? Talking to your employee about appropriate workplace boundaries, Victoria replied smoothly. Richard's eyes found Alicia's, searching for signs of damage. Are you all right? The simple question, asked with genuine concern, was her undoing. Not Victoria's cruelty or the media attention or the whisper gossip, but Richard's worry for her feelings when his own world was falling apart. I'm fine, she lied. No, he said firmly, you're not. And this ends now. Have you ever been judged or misunderstood for your relationship? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments, because what Richard says next will change everything. The security cameras had captured everything, not just their growing attraction, but the moment she saved his company from a billion-dollar disaster. The boardroom felt like a courtroom, with Alicia as the defendant facing charges she didn't fully understand. Every board member looked grim, their expensive suits and disapproving expressions forming a wall of judgment that seemed impossible to breach. Richard stood at the head of the conference table, laptop open, his jaw set in a way that meant war. Gentlemen, ladies, he began, his voice carrying the kind of authority that built empires. We're here to address concerns about recent media coverage. Some of you seem to think Ms. Brown's presence at this company represents a liability. Board members shifted uncomfortably. A few nodded in agreement. With respect, Richard, said James Morrison, the oldest member and unofficial leader of the group, the optics are problematic. A CEO dating an employee. Who said anything about dating? Richard's voice cut like a blade. Uncomfortable silence filled the room. Someone coughed. Papers rustled. The photographs suggest. Another member began. The photographs suggest 2 colleagues attending a company-sponsored networking event. Richard's tone brooked no argument. But since you all seem concerned about Ms. Brown's qualifications and the circumstances of her hiring, let me refresh your memories. He clicked a key on his laptop, and the wall-mounted screen came alive. Security footage, black and white, timestamp showing 3 months earlier. The image showed Richard's office after hours, empty except for a cleaning cart in the corner. This is from a night before our disastrous board meeting about the Henderson Industries deal, Richard explained. The footage showed Alicia entering the frame, methodically cleaning the office. Nothing unusual, just a woman doing her job. Then something changed. She paused by the desk, her attention caught by the contract papers scattered across the mahogany surface. The camera captured her picking up a page, studying it with intense concentration. Notice the timestamp, Richard said. 11:47 p.m. Ms. Brown spent the next 23 minutes reviewing a contract that 9 Harvard-educated lawyers had already approved. The room was dead silent as they watched Alicia work. She wasn't just glancing at papers. She was analyzing, cross-referencing, making notes on a napkin she'd pulled from the cleaning cart. The next morning, as you'll recall, I called an emergency meeting to cancel the Henderson deal. You all wondered how I discovered the fatal flaws in their contract overnight. Board members exchanged glances. A few looked genuinely surprised. Richard clicked another key. The footage switched to a different angle, showing the conversation between him and Alicia when he caught her studying the documents. There was no audio, but their body language told the story clearly. Her nervousness, his growing amazement, The moment when respect replaced suspicion in his expression. Ms. Brown identified a clause that would have transferred $800 million worth of intellectual property to our competitors, Richard continued. She saved this company from the most expensive mistake in our corporate history. The footage continued, showing their midnight meeting in the conference room. Professional, intense, two brilliant minds working together to solve a complex problem. By my calculations, Ms. Brown's analysis generated approximately $2 billion in protected value for this company. Her promotion to senior analyst wasn't favoritism. It was the smartest business decision I've ever made. James Morrison leaned forward, studying the screen. This footage is from 3 months ago, before she was promoted, before anyone knew her name, before any personal feelings could have influenced professional judgment. The implication was clear. Whatever attraction existed between them had developed after she'd proven her worth, not because of it. Richard clicked through more footage. Alicia working late nights, attending client meetings, delivering presentations that impressed seasoned executives. A visual resume that spoke louder than any gossip columnist speculation. Since joining our team, Ms. Brown has increased client retention by 15%, identified cost savings worth millions, and earned the respect of every department head in this building. Her personal life is irrelevant to her professional contributions. The boardroom energy had shifted completely. Where there had been disapproval and suspicion, now there was grudging respect and even embarrassment. Sarah Chun, the newest board member, spoke up. Richard, I owe you and Ms. Brown an apology. I let media speculation cloud my judgment of her work product. Others nodded in agreement. James Morrison cleared his throat uncomfortably. The footage is illuminating, he admitted. But Richard, the media attention, will die down when they realize there's no real story here. Richard finished. Ms. Brown is a talented employee who happens to be photogenic. End of scandal. He closed the laptop with decisive finality. Are there any other concerns about personnel decisions? Silence. Good. Then we can move on to actual business matters. As board members filed out, Richard caught Alicia's eye and nodded toward his office. She followed, her legs shaky with relief and residual adrenaline. Thank you, she said when the door closed behind them. Don't thank me. Thank the security cameras. He moved to the window, looking out at the city that no longer felt quite so hostile. Although I have to admit, watching that footage reminded me of something. What's that? He turned to face her, and his expression held warmth that made her pulse quicken. The night I caught you reading that contract, you could have lied. Made up some excuse about accidentally seeing the papers. But you didn't. You told me the truth, even though it could have cost you everything. Honesty seemed like the right choice. It was the choice that saved my company, and earned my respect long before it earned mine. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. You're what? She prompted. My complete and total fascination with a brilliant woman hiding behind a mop bucket. When was the last time your hard work was truly recognized? How did it feel to finally be seen for your talents? Share below, because vindication feels sweet, but the celebration is about to get complicated. He had built his life on calculated risks and profitable decisions. But choosing between duty and desire couldn't be solved with spreadsheets and logic. The engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. 300 of Chicago's most influential people gathered in the ballroom of the Palmer House, toasting Richard and Victoria's upcoming wedding with champagne that cost more per bottle than most people made in a week. Richard stood at the head table, wearing his public smile like armor, accepting congratulations from men who wanted his business connections and women who envied Victoria's cash. But his eyes kept finding Alicia across the crowded room. She hadn't wanted to attend, had argued that her presence would only fuel more gossip. But the invitation had come from the board of directors, a command performance disguised as a social courtesy. She looked stunning in a midnight blue dress that skimmed her curves without revealing too much. Professional, but undeniably feminine. Every time someone complimented Victoria on her upcoming nuptials, Alicia smiled politely and sipped her champagne like her heart wasn't breaking with each passing toast. Victoria played her role perfectly. the radiant bride-to-be, graciously accepting well wishes while keeping one eye on Richard and another on Alicia. Her white cocktail dress was a deliberate choice, practically a wedding dress preview, reminding everyone exactly who belonged at Richard's side. "Isn't she lovely?" Victoria's voice carried across conversations as she gestured toward her engagement ring. "Richard has such exquisite taste." The ring caught the light every time she moved her hand, throwing sparkles like tiny spotlights announcing her claim on Richard's future. But Richard wasn't looking at the ring or the dress or the performance. He was watching Alicia pretend she didn't notice him watching her. And with every passing minute, something inside his chest grew heavier. The turning point came during the speeches. Victoria's father took the microphone first, praising Richard's business acumen and his daughter's beauty. The crowd laughed at appropriate moments and nodded approval at the mention of merging two prominent Chicago families. Then James Morrison stood up, champagne glass in hand. "I've known Richard Dalton for 15 years, Morrison began. Watched him build an empire through intelligence, determination, and an eye for recognizing true value where others see none." Richard tensed. "Where's this going?" Just this week, we witnessed another example of Richard's gift for seeing potential. Our newest team member, Ms. Alicia Brown, has already proven herself invaluable to our organization. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Victoria's smile grew strained. "In fact," Morrison continued, "Ms. Brown's insights recently saved our company from what could have been a catastrophic business decision. It's rare to find someone who combines analytical brilliance with the courage to speak truth to power." The applause grew louder, more genuine. People were looking at Alicia now, reassessing her presence at this elite gathering. So let's toast not just Richard and Victoria's future together, but also Richard's continued ability to surround himself with exceptional people. As glasses raised throughout the ballroom, Richard felt something crack inside his chest. Here was Morrison, a man he respected, publicly praising Alicia's contributions while celebrating Richard's engagement to someone else. The irony was suffocating. Victoria's fingernails dug into his arm as she leaned close. "How wonderful," she whispered, her voice sugar-sweet with underlying venom. "Your little cleaning lady is getting recognition at my engagement party." Something in her tone, the casual cruelty, the assumption that Alicia was somehow less worthy of respect, made Richard's decision for him. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against marble floors. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet ballroom, "I have something to say." Victoria's face went pale. "Richard, darling, this isn't really the time." "No, it's exactly the time." He gently but firmly removed her hand from his arm. "Because I've been living a lie, and all of you deserve to hear the truth." The silence was deafening. 300 people holding their breath, champagne glasses frozen halfway to lips, sensing that they were about to witness either a romantic declaration or a complete disaster. Richard's eyes found Alicia across the room. She was shaking her head slightly, silently begging him not to do whatever he was about to do. But for the first time in months, he knew exactly what he needed to say. "Victoria Henderson is everything any man should want," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. "She's beautiful, accomplished, from a wonderful family. She deserves a husband who loves her completely." Victoria's breathing had become shallow, her knuckles white around her champagne flute. "The problem is," Richard continued, "I'm not that man. I can't marry someone when my heart belongs to someone else." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. Someone dropped a glass, the sound of shattering crystal punctuating the moment like an exclamation point. Richard pulled the engagement ring from his pocket, the one he'd been carrying all evening like a weight against his conscience. "Victoria, I'm sorry. You deserve better than a man who's in love with someone else." He placed the ring on the table between them, the diamond catching light like a fallen star. Victoria stared at the ring, then at Richard, then at the crowd of people witnessing her public humiliation. When she spoke, her voice was barely controlled rage. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. No, Richard replied, looking directly at Alicia across the room. I'm finally making the right choice. What would you choose, security and expectation, or risk and authentic love? Tell me in the comments what you would have done, because what happens next will shock everyone in that ballroom. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. Sometimes it chains you to a reality you never wanted to see. The morning after the engagement party, Chicago's gossip machine worked overtime. Dalton dumps debutante for cleaning lady, screamed the Tribune's headline. Rags to Rich's romance rocks high society, proclaimed the Sun-Times. But it was the society blog that delivered the killing blow. Exclusive. The real story behind Richard Dalton's mystery woman. Alicia read the article 3 times before the words fully sank in. Sources close to the Dalton social circle reveal that the billionaire CEO's interest in former janitor Alicia Brown began as a bet among his wealthy friends. They were joking about Richard's need to play white knight, says an anonymous insider. Someone bet him he couldn't seduce the help and make her think it was real. It was supposed to be harmless fun. The phone slipped from her numb fingers, clattering to the kitchen floor of her apartment. The same apartment she'd been planning to move out of, the same life she'd been ready to transform because she actually thought, that someone like Richard Dalton could fall in love with someone like her. The knock on her door came at exactly 9 a.m. She knew it was him before she opened it, could feel his presence through the walls like a magnetic pull that no amount of betrayal could completely break. Richard stood in her hallway looking like he hadn't slept. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes wild with something that looked like desperation. Alicia, please, let me explain. She stepped aside to let him in, but only because she needed to hear him try to justify the unjustifiable. Needed to watch him attempt to spin a bet into a love story. Her apartment felt smaller with him in it. His expensive cologne mixed with the scent of the coffee she'd been too sick to drink. He dominated the space just by existing, the same way he'd dominated her thoughts for months. You read the article, he said. It wasn't a question. Which part was your favorite? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The part where your friends bet you couldn't seduce the cleaning lady? Or the part where they called it harmless fun? Richard flinched like she'd hit him. It wasn't like that. No. Then how was it, Richard? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I was the punchline to a very expensive joke. He moved toward her, hands outstretched like he was approaching a wounded animal. Yes, there was a bet. But Alicia, you have to understand. I understand perfectly. She stepped back, maintaining distance between them. I understand that I was stupid enough to think a man like you could actually see something valuable in a woman like me. I do see something valuable. I see everything valuable. Because of a bet. The bet ended the night I realized I was falling in love with you, he said desperately. It ended the moment you explained that contract, and I saw your brilliance, your courage, your incredible mind. Everything after that was real. His words should have made her feel better. Should have erased the humiliation of knowing she'd been part of some rich man's entertainment. Instead, they made everything worse. When? She asked quietly. When what? When did the bet end? Exactly? Before you offered me the job? Before you invited me to the gala? Before you broke up with Victoria in front of 300 people? She watched his face carefully, saw the exact moment he realized the trap his honesty had built. The job was real, he said. Your qualifications. The job was part of the bet, she finished. Get close to the cleaning lady. Make her grateful. Make her trust you. No. Alicia, no. By the time I offered you the position, I already knew. You knew what? That you were falling for me? Or that you were winning the bet? Richard ran his hands through his hair, frustration and panic warring in his expression. Does it matter how it started if what we have now is real? The question hung between them like a challenge. Did it matter? Could love built on false foundations ever become genuine? Yes, she said simply. It matters. Because I never would have let myself care about you if I'd known I was part of a game. You weren't part of a game. You are the most important person in my life. I was a bet, Richard. A challenge. Something to be conquered and won. That's not true, isn't it? She picked up her phone, scrolling to the article that had destroyed her world. Your friend is quoted here saying the bet was about whether you could make me fall in love with you. Not whether you could fall in love with me. Whether you could make me love you. The distinction was everything. The difference between mutual feeling and manipulation. Between love and conquest. Richard's silence was answer enough. Did you win? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alicia, did you win a bet? Richard, did you prove you could make the poor, grateful cleaning lady fall in love with her rich, powerful boss? He looked at her with eyes full of pain and regret, and something that might have been love, if love could exist alongside such cruelty. Yes, he said finally, I won. The admission hit her like a physical blow. She'd known it was true, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that broke something inside her chest. Then congratulations, she said, walking to the door and opening it. You played the game perfectly. Have you ever discovered that something you thought was real had false origins? How did you move past that betrayal? Share below, because sometimes the truth hurts more than lies ever could. She carried his child and his betrayal in equal measure, but only one of them was growing stronger every day. The pregnancy test sat on her bathroom counter like a loaded gun. 2 pink lines that changed everything. 2 pink lines that made her betrayal complete. Not just the other woman now, but the other woman carrying his child. 6 weeks had passed since she'd left Chicago. 6 weeks since she'd discovered the bet that turned their love story into his entertainment. 6 weeks of telling herself she was better off without Richard Dalton and his world of privilege and casual cruelty. But the baby growing inside her didn't care about pride or heartbreak or the reason she'd run. The Greyhound station at midnight was a gallery of goodbyes and fresh starts. Harsh lights cast shadows across tired faces. The smell of diesel fuel mixed with coffee and dreams of somewhere better. She'd taken the same bus route months ago, running toward Chicago and possibility. Now she was running back to Mississippi, carrying secrets that would follow her forever. Her phone buzzed constantly. Richard's name lighting up the screen dozens of times each day. Text messages that progressed from confusion to desperation to anger and back to pleading. Where are you? Please call me back. Let me explain. I am sorry. God, Alicia, I'm so sorry. She'd stopped reading them after the first week, but she couldn't bring herself to block his number completely. Some masochistic part of her needed to know he was still trying to reach her, still thinking about her, still regretting what he'd lost. Jackson, Mississippi welcomed her back with humid air and familiar poverty. Her grandmother's house sat exactly as she'd left it 3 years ago. Peeling paint, sagging porch, windows that didn't quite close right. But it was home. It was honest. It was everything Richard's penthouse apartment wasn't. Her savings from 6 months at Dalton Enterprises would last maybe 3 months if she was careful. After that, she'd need a plan, a job, a way to support herself and a baby without depending on anyone else ever again. The community college enrollment office smelled like old carpet and broken dreams. But the woman behind the desk had kind eyes and patient hands as she helped Alicia fill out financial aid forms. Accounting program? The counselor asked. That's a good choice. Practical. Always jobs available for people who understand numbers. Alicia nodded, trying not to think about how she'd already had that job, already proven she understood numbers better than most, already thrown it all away for love that turned out to be lies. When would you like to start? Immediately. Some nights, she dreamed about Richard finding her. In her dreams, he would appear at her door with explanations that made sense, apologies that healed everything, love that was real this time. He would hold her while she told him about the baby. He would promise to be the father their child deserved. Then she would wake up, remember the laughter in that recording, remember how casually he discussed seducing her, remember that some betrayals couldn't be forgiven no matter how much you wanted to. But other nights, she dreamed about their baby, a little girl with her eyes and his stubborn chin, a little boy with his intelligence and her determination, a child who would never have to choose between love and survival, who would grow up knowing their worth wasn't dependent on other people's approval. Those dreams made her stronger. The morning sickness hit hardest during her statistics class. Professor Martinez would look at her with concern as she rushed from the room, but she always came back, always took notes, always turned in assignments on time. Education was her lifeline now, the one thing no one could take away, no matter how much they hurt her. Her phone rang during lunch break. Richard's name on the screen as always, but this time she answered before she could change her mind. Alicia? His voice was rough, desperate. Jesus, I've been calling for weeks. Where are you? It doesn't matter where I am. It matters to me. Everything about you matters to me. The words should have felt good. 6 weeks ago, they would have made her melt. Now they just made her tired. Does it? Or did I just become more interesting when I stopped being available? Silence. Then, you heard the recording. It wasn't a question. They both knew what had destroyed them. I heard enough. It wasn't what you think. The bet. It was stupid. It was before I knew you. Stop. Her voice cut through his excuses like a blade. Don't make this worse by lying about it now. I'm not lying. Yes, there was a bet. Yes, I was an idiot for making it. But everything that happened between us, everything I felt for you, none of that was fake. How would I know the difference? The question hung between them, unanswerable because trust, once broken, left scars that made it impossible to see clearly. Let me come to you, he said quietly. Let me explain in person. No. Alicia, please. I love you. 3 words that should have fixed everything. 3 words that came 6 weeks too late. Love doesn't make bets about seducing people, Richard. Love doesn't treat people like entertainment for your friends. I know. You're right. I was wrong, and I hate myself for it, but... She hung up before he could finish. Some conversations were too dangerous to continue, especially when you were carrying the child of the man who broke your heart. 6 months later, as she graduated from the community college accounting program she'd enrolled in, a familiar figure stood at the back of the auditorium. He'd found her, but she wasn't the same woman who'd left Chicago pregnant and broken. When someone you loved came back after hurting you, what would it take for you to give them another chance? Share your thoughts below, because what happens next will test everything they thought they knew about forgiveness. He spent 6 months searching for her, but when he found her, she had found herself, and that changed everything. Richard Dalton looked out of place in the Jackson Community College gymnasium. His designer suit stood out among the folding chairs and handmade graduation banners like a diamond in a box of costume jewelry. But his eyes never left Alicia as she walked across the makeshift stage to claim her accounting diploma. She was different now, visibly pregnant, glowing with the kind of confidence that came from surviving your worst fears and discovering you were stronger than you knew. The scared cleaning girl who had once hidden in his office shadows was gone, replaced by a woman who owned her space in the world. When her name was called, Alicia Brown, graduating summa cum laude, the crowd's applause was genuine and warm. These people knew her story. They'd watched her study through morning sickness, complete assignments while her belly grew, prove that sometimes starting over was the only way forward. She saw him as she descended the stage steps. Their eyes met across the gymnasium, and for a moment, the noise of celebration faded into background static. 6 months of separation collapsed into that single look, recognition, pain, longing, and something new, something that looked like forgiveness, but harder earned. After the ceremony, families clustered around graduates with flowers and cameras. Alicia stood alone, diploma in hand, until Richard approached with the careful movements of a man walking through a minefield. Congratulations, he said softly. Summa cum laude. Your grandmother would be proud. The mention of her grandmother was exactly the right thing to say. It acknowledged their history without demanding forgiveness, honored her accomplishments without trying to claim credit. Thank you. Her voice was steady, controlled. How did you find me? Private investigator. It took 4 months. He paused, studying her face for permission to continue. You look beautiful, Alicia. Pregnancy suits you. She placed a protective hand over her rounded belly. 7 months along now, the baby active and strong. Richard's eyes followed the movement, and she watched understanding dawn across his features. Is it yours? Yes. The word hit him like a physical blow. He actually stepped backward, one hand reaching for the nearest chair to steady himself. Why didn't you tell me? What would have been the point? You made your feelings clear enough in that recording. Richard's jaw tightened. That recording was taken out of context. It was before you got what you wanted? The question came out sharper than she'd intended. Pregnancy hormones amplifying emotions she'd tried to keep buried. Before I fell in love with you. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Before you became the most important person in my world. Pretty words, Richard. But I've heard your pretty words before. They stood in the emptying gymnasium, surrounded by the debris of celebration. Abandoned programs, deflated balloons, the echoes of dreams being acknowledged and futures being planned. Can we go somewhere private? He asked. Please. I know you don't owe me anything, but I've been carrying this for 6 months, and I need you to hear it. Against every instinct screaming warnings, she nodded. There's a diner down the street, but I'm not promising anything beyond coffee and conversation. The Magnolia Diner felt like sacred ground. Cracked vinyl booths and fluorescent lights, creating an unlikely cathedral for second chances and careful conversations. They sat across from each other, her hands wrapped around a mug of decaf coffee, his fingers drumming nervously against the laminate table. I broke off my engagement, he said without preamble. The announcement should have felt like victory. 6 months ago, it would have been everything she wanted to hear. Now it just felt complicated. When 2 days after you left, Victoria had the recording made. She hired someone to follow us, to prove I was having an affair. Alicia's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. She what? The bet was real. I won't lie about that. My friends and I were drunk, acting like idiots, and yes, I made a stupid wager about seducing you. But that was before our first real conversation. Before I realized you were brilliant. Before I fell so hard I forgot what breathing felt like without you. The explanation felt both too little and too much. It didn't erase the humiliation of knowing she'd been discussed like a conquest, but it reframed the betrayal in ways that made her chest ache with possibilities she'd try to kill. Victoria used that recording to destroy us, Richard continued. She knew it would hurt you in ways that would make you run, because she also knew that what we had was real. Was it? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Real, I mean. Richard leaned forward, his eyes intense with the honesty that had always been his most dangerous weapon. Every moment, every conversation, every time I touched you, kissed you, held you, all of it was real. The bet ended the night you saved my company. Everything after that was just me falling deeper in love with a woman I didn't deserve. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to the emotional turmoil swirling around them. Richard's eyes dropped to her belly, wonder and regret warring across his features. Can I? He gestured hesitantly toward her stomach. She should have said no, should have maintained the boundaries that had protected her for 6 months. Instead, she found herself taking his hand and placing it where their child was strongest. The baby kicked immediately, as if recognizing something familiar in his touch. Richard's eyes filled with tears he didn't try to hide. My child, he whispered with reverence that took her breath away. If someone you loved came back after hurting you, what would it take for you to give them another chance? What actions speak louder than words? Share your thoughts below, because parenthood changes everything, including the rules of forgiveness. Love isn't about grand gestures and expensive gifts. Sometimes it's about showing up every day until trust grows back one moment at a time. Richard didn't go back to Chicago. Instead, he checked into the Hampton Inn on Highway 49 and proceeded to turn Alicia's quiet life in Jackson upside down through sheer, stubborn persistence. He showed up at her prenatal appointments, sitting quietly in waiting rooms until her doctor asked if he was the father. He appeared at her part-time job at Henderson's Tax Prep, dropping off lunch with notes that said nothing more than thinking of you. He attended her evening study groups, helping other students with business concepts while carefully avoiding any appearance of trying to buy his way back into her good graces. The local diner, where they'd had their first real conversation, became their unofficial meeting place. Every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 p.m., he would sit in booth 3, ordering coffee he barely touched and waiting to see if she would join him. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. When she did show up, they talked carefully around the elephant in the room, their history, their future, the growing child that connected them whether she forgave him or not. Instead, they discussed her classes, his business dealings, books they'd read, places they'd traveled. Slowly, carefully, they began to remember why they'd fallen in love in the first place. "You don't have to do this," she told him one evening as they shared a piece of peach pie that was famous throughout 3 counties. "The baby and I will be fine without you." Richard set down his fork and looked at her with the intensity that still made her pulse skip. "I know you'll be fine. You're the strongest person I've ever met. But I don't want to miss this." "Miss what?" "Watching you become a mother. Seeing our child's first smile. Teaching them to ride a bike. Reading bedtime stories. Fighting about homework. All of it." The vision he painted was domestic and simple, and everything she'd dreamed about during long nights in Chicago when she'd allowed herself to imagine a future with him. "Richard, you live in a penthouse apartment. You run a Fortune 500 company. Your life is board meetings and charity galas and decisions that affect thousands of people. My life is whatever I choose to make it. And you choose this?" She gestured around the small-town diner with its checkered tablecloths and local high school photos covering every wall. "I choose you. I choose our baby. If that means learning to love small-town life, then I guess I better start practicing." To prove his point, he began volunteering at the community center where she taught financial literacy classes to single mothers. He funded new computers for the local library. He quietly paid off the medical bills for 3 families whose children needed surgery they couldn't afford. He never made a public show of his generosity, never attached his name to donations, never used his wealth as a weapon to force forgiveness. Instead, he simply showed up, day after day, week after week, proving through consistent presence that his feelings weren't temporary, his commitment wasn't conditional, and his love wasn't dependent on her immediate forgiveness. The turning point came during her 8th month of pregnancy. She was walking out of her evening accounting class when sharp pains doubled her over in the parking lot. False labor, she told herself, trying to breathe through contractions that felt too real, too strong, too early. Her phone rang as she fumbled for her car keys. Richard calling at exactly 9:15 p.m. like he had every night for 3 months. "Hi," she gasped, another contraction stealing her breath. "Alicia? What's wrong?" "I think I might be in labor." "Where are you?" "Community college parking lot." "Don't move. I'm 5 minutes away." He made it in 3. She was leaning against her car, breathing through contractions that were definitely not false labor, when his rental car screeched into the lot. He was out and beside her before the engine stopped running. "How far apart are the contractions?" "For minutes. Maybe 3. "Okay. My car or yours?" "Yours. I can't drive." The 20-minute ride to the regional medical center was the longest and shortest of both their lives. Richard held her hand while she breathed through contractions, his voice calm and steady as he called ahead to alert the hospital. "You're going to be okay," he kept saying. "Both of you. Everything's going to be fine." She wanted to believe him. More than that, she realized she did believe him. "Richard, I'm scared. I know, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." It turned out to be false labor, after all. 6 hours of monitoring for fluids and doctor consultations before they were sent home with instructions to rest and avoid stress. But something had shifted during those hours in the hospital room. Something fundamental about trust and partnership and the difference between loving someone and being willing to build a life with them. As they sat in his hotel room at 3 a.m., sharing vending machine sandwiches and watching infomercials, she finally asked the question that had been burning in her chest for months. "Why didn't you fight the bet? When your friends made it, why didn't you tell them to go to hell?" Richard was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands like they held answers he'd been afraid to examine. "Because I was exactly the kind of man who would make that bet," he said finally. "Arrogant, entitled, used to treating people like entertainment. You didn't just save my company, Alicia. You saved me from becoming someone I would have hated." What does it mean to earn someone's trust back? What actions speak louder than words? Share your thoughts below, because sometimes the most important conversations happen at 3 a.m. in hotel rooms over vending machine food. She brought their daughter into the world holding his hand, the same way they were learning to build their future together, one careful step at a time. Emma Rose Dalton arrived 3 weeks early on a Tuesday morning in March, demanding attention with lungs that could wake the dead and tiny fingers that immediately wrapped around everything within reach. The hospital room glowed with golden morning light as their daughter slept between them. Alicia's head rested on Richard's shoulder, exhaustion and joy painting their faces with quiet wonder. Tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb while he whispered promises about bedtime stories and college funds and unconditional love. "She's perfect," he breathed, studying Emma's features with the intensity he once reserved for quarterly reports. "She gets that from her mother," Alicia replied, and for the first time in months, her smile held no reservation. "Look at those eyelashes. And her hands, they're so small. She's going to be strong," Alicia murmured, watching their daughter's chest rise and fall with steady breaths. "Look how she holds on." Richard pressed a kiss to the top of Alicia's head, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, mixed with hospital soap and new baby sweetness. "We did good," he said softly. "We did." The simple acknowledgement carried weight beyond those 2 words. We, not you or me, but us, together, a team. Over the next few days, as they navigated the chaos of new parenthood, something clicked into place between them. The careful politeness that had marked their relationship since his return began dissolving into something more natural, more real. They took turns with midnight feedings. Richard proved surprisingly good at diaper changes, while Alicia mastered the art of one-handed everything. They laughed at Emma's dramatic expressions and worried together when she cried for reasons they couldn't identify. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Richard admitted during one of those 3 a.m. feeding sessions. Emma cradled against his chest while Alicia dozed in the rocking chair beside him. "It's terrifying, isn't it?" she replied without opening her eyes. "Like someone handed you their heart and said, 'Don't drop it.'" Exactly. When they brought Emma home to Alicia's small rental house, Richard didn't assume he was included in the domestic arrangement. Instead, he asked permission for everything. Could he stay for dinner? Could he help with bath time? Could he sleep on the couch in case Emma needed something during the night? The asking meant everything. Gradually, his presence became part of their routine. He learned to make bottles at 2 a.m. without turning on lights. He discovered that Emma settled fastest when he hummed old jazz standards his father used to play. He mastered the complicated origami of folding tiny onesies and became an expert at interpreting different types of cries. "You're good at this," Alicia told him one evening as she watched him rock Emma to sleep, his large hands gentle and sure as he supported their daughter's tiny body. "I had a good teacher." "Who taught you?" "You. Watching you with her, seeing how you anticipate what she needs, how you make everything look effortless even when it's hard. It doesn't feel effortless. The best things never do." They were learning to be a family in the space between forgiveness and forever, not quite ready to make promises about the future, but no longer afraid to hope for one. The community embraced them with the warmth that small towns reserve for their own. Neighbors brought casseroles and offered babysitting. The ladies from Alicia's church organized a meal train that kept their refrigerator stocked for weeks. Emma became the unofficial mascot of the community center, sleeping peacefully in her carrier while Alicia taught financial literacy classes and Richard helped other parents navigate business loans and tax questions. "You realize what's happening, don't you?" Alicia asked one evening as they sat on her front porch, Emma sleeping in the swing between them while fireflies danced in the humid Mississippi air. "What's happening?" "You're putting down roots. Real ones." Richard considered this, watching lightning bugs blink like tiny Christmas lights in the oak trees that shaded her yard. "Good," he said finally. "I've been floating for too long." 2 weeks later, he appeared at her door with a real estate contract and a nervous smile. "What's this?" she asked, bouncing Emma on her hip while she read through the paperwork. "I bought the house next door, if that's okay with you." The elderly Hendersons had been trying to sell their place for months. It was a sweet craftsman bungalow with good bones and a yard that connected to hers through a gap in the hedge. Next door, close enough to help with Emma, far enough away that you don't feel crowded. "I thought," If we're going to do this co-parenting thing, we should do it right. Co-parenting. The word felt both accurate and insufficient for what they were building together. And your company? Your life in Chicago. I can run the company from anywhere. Chicago never felt like home anyway. That night, after Emma was finally asleep and Richard had gone back to his hotel room, Alicia stood in her kitchen making a mental list of everything that had changed in the past year. 12 months ago, she'd been cleaning office buildings and hiding her intelligence behind industrial-strength floor cleaner. Now she had her accounting degree, a beautiful daughter, and a man who'd restructured his entire life around the possibility of earning back her trust. What does it mean to build a family on forgiveness and growth? Share your thoughts on second chances below, because sometimes love isn't about perfect timing. It's about being willing to do the work when it matters most. She once cleaned his office floors on her knees. Now he was the one kneeling, asking for the privilege of being her husband. 2 years later, the community garden they'd planted together bloomed around them in organized chaos. Sunflowers towered over tomato plants. Herbs grew wild beside carefully tended roses, and Emma toddled between the rows, her chubby hands reaching for everything colorful and interesting. Much like the life they'd built from the ashes of their first disastrous meeting. The garden had been Richard's idea, a way to give back to the community that had welcomed him, to teach Emma about growing things, to create something beautiful together that neither could have imagined alone. Now, on a perfect Saturday morning in May, with Emma napping in her stroller and the scent of jasmine heavy in the air, Richard knelt between the pepper plants and pulled out a ring box that had been burning a hole in his pocket for weeks. Alicia, she looked up from the strawberry patch, dirt smudged on her cheek and contentment radiating from every pore. The scared, cleaning girl who had once hidden her brilliance was long gone, replaced by a woman who owned her space in the world and wasn't afraid to take up room in it. "What are you doing down there?" she asked, then saw the box and went very still. "I'm asking for the privilege of being your husband." The words came out steady, sure, carrying 2 years of proving himself worthy of the question. "Richard, let me finish," he said gently. "I know this isn't how I should have done it the first time. I should have seen your worth before I made that stupid bet. I should have protected what we had instead of letting someone else destroy it. I should have been the man you deserved from the beginning." Emma stirred in her stroller, making the soft baby sounds that meant she'd be awake soon and demanding attention. But for now, the world narrowed to just the two of them and a question that had been building for months. "But I'm asking now, with everything I've learned about love and partnership and the difference between wanting someone and being willing to build a life with them." He opened a ring box, revealing not the massive diamond she might have expected from a millionaire CEO, but something more personal. More them. A vintage setting with her grandmother's ruby surrounded by smaller diamonds. The entire piece reset in a style that honored the past while embracing the future. "My grandmother's stone," she whispered. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, had it. She said your grandmother always hoped you'd wear it someday, when you found someone who saw your value." Tears blurred her vision as memories flooded back. Her grandmother's hands, worn from work but gentle with love, pointing out the ring in old photos and promising that someday Alicia would have something beautiful to mark her own love story. "She would have liked you," Alicia said softly. "I hope so, because I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the woman she raised." The proposal speech he'd planned disappeared, replaced by truth that came straight from his heart. "You taught me that real wealth isn't counted in dollars, but in the lives you touch and the love you build. You showed me that intelligence without kindness is worthless, that success without integrity is hollow, and that the most powerful love doesn't rescue you from your life. It recognizes the strength that was there all along." Emma woke up then, as if sensing that important things were happening without her. She pulled herself up in the stroller, reaching toward them with grabby hands and the imperious demands of a 2-year-old who expected to be included in everything. "Mama, Daddy, up!" Richard laughed, scooping Emma out of her stroller and settling her on his lap while still kneeling in the garden dirt. "What do you think, Emma? Should Daddy marry Mama?" "Yes." Emma clapped her hands with the enthusiasm of someone who had no idea what marriage meant, but was sure it involved cake. See? Richard grinned at Alicia. Even Emma thinks it's a good idea. You're both ganging up on me. Is it working? Alicia looked at them, her daughter and the man who had become so much more than Emma's father. Richard had learned to braid tiny pigtails and negotiate with toddler logic. He sang off-key lullabies and read Good Night Moon with the same intensity he once brought to board meetings. He had restructured his entire company around remote work, so he could be present for dance recitals and playground dates and all the small moments that made up a real life. He had earned this. They had earned this. Yes, she said simply. The ring slid onto her finger like it belonged there, like her grandmother's love had been waiting all these years to become part of her own love story. When he carried her across the threshold of their new home that evening, not his penthouse, but a house they'd chosen together, she whispered against his neck, I love you, Richard Dalton. I love you too, Mrs. Dalton, he replied, and the name sounded like a promise they'd both finally learned to keep. 6 months later, they were married in the same community center where Richard had first volunteered, surrounded by neighbors who had become family and colleagues who had become friends. Emma served as flower girl, throwing petals with the dedication of someone convinced she was performing the most important job in the world. The scholarship fund they'd established in her grandmother's name sent its first recipients to college that fall. Local kids who had grown up believing education was a luxury they couldn't afford discovered that sometimes angels wore designer suits and had learned humility from cleaning women who saw worth in everyone. So what would you do if someone saw your worth before you believed in it yourself? Would you run? Or would you build something that lasts? Comment below with what you would have done in her shoes. If this story of second chances and hidden potential touched your heart, hit that like button. Subscribe for more stories that prove love isn't about perfection. It's about growth. Tell me in the comments which moment resonated most with you. And remember, sometimes the person who changes your life is the one you almost overlooked. The most powerful love doesn't rescue you from your life. It recognizes the strength that's been there all along.